Marcellus Reynolds. I love you. Just took a sip of the tea right before. I think that's a good intro for you.
Yes, it is.
So you are a man of many talents, but they all kind of surround the fashion world, the modeling world, and you were a model yourself. What drew you to that life?
I always feel like I have to put a disclaimer on that when somebody's like, "Oh, you used to be a model." I'm like, yes, 25 years and 25 pounds ago. So some people are straining at their screens, going, "Really? What? You a model?" But yeah, I was lucky enough to be a male model. When I say lucky enough to be a male model, I mean it. I was a very lucky boy. I was working my way through college very slowly as a waiter, and an agent discovered me. Your typical discovery story. I was a waiter, I was a waitress, I was, whatever. And she saw me, and it was the same woman that discovered Cindy Crawford back in the day.
Jesus.
And she was like, "You should be a model." And I actually thought she was hitting on me. And I was like, "Girl, I'm gay." And she was like, "No, you should be a model." And literally, but it was kind of funny because it was going that way anyway. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were I was working in a really hot restaurant in Chicago, and a lot of people that would come in the restaurant were like photographers and stylists and blah, blah, blah. So I had done a few things, but I hadn't like actually accepted that because I am a theater major at the University of Illinois. I am going to be a star, and then when I finally embraced the model thing, I like dropped out of college and just like, fuck it, I'm a model.
Guess I'm a model now.
I guess I'm a model now.
Gotta live that life.
But the crazy thing was, like, right out of the gate, like my card went out on a Friday, and I had my first booking the following Friday.
It's unheard of.
And I cried like a baby in the trailer because when I got there, it was me playing a dad, and I was all like, "I'm 23 years old. I can't be somebody's father."
I had that same thing happen to me after I'd moved from LA, and I was in New York for a little while, and I was like, I think I missed doing commercials. I missed like just being in that world. And I sat down with the casting agent who was going to sign me, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we're going to put you out there for all those young dad roles and the blah blah." I was like, "Whoa, what?" I was like, "I'm 29 years old," and they're like, "People in the Midwest have 2 kids by the time they're your age," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right."
That's true.
But I was like, "No, I'm like the hot young guy." They're like, "No, you're the young dad."
Right. It was so crazy. And then when the kid came up, this is awful, and I've never said this before, but when they bought out the kid, he wasn't cute. And I was like, if I had a child, my child would be beautiful.
Oh my God. You're like, no, I do not claim this kid.
That's disgusting.
Oh. So wait, so you had a full discovery story though. Like I think no one ever discovered me, so I'm already jealous of that. But you said you kind of played it off like, well, it's your typical discovery story. Well, obviously you had a thing, you had a presence. I mean, you do have a presence. That's a clear thing. And I didn't realize that you were a theater major. So I'm guessing that a lot of that just confidence comes from performing. Is that something you started at an early age?
Well, okay, so not to get serious, but I was the gay kid in a Black neighborhood, in a middle to lower income neighborhood. They were like poor people, but they were like people like my family, which were, I would say, middle class, somewhere, in there. And when you're the gay kid in a Black neighborhood, that's the worst thing you could be.
Sure.
It really is the worst thing you could be. And so I was bullied and I was beaten up. And but I was like a fighter because I'd grown up in my house with like a cousin that was like a year behind me, and then my younger brother was 2 years behind me. And you know how little boys, all they know how to do is fight each other. Yeah. So literally we would have these crazy rows in my house and break stuff. And my grandmother would come in with a belt and beat the hell out of all three of us. So I grew up like fighting. So when people would say something to me I didn't like, I would like hit them like I was just a fighter because I was used to that. And then once like bullies figure out that you're like gonna fight, then it becomes groups of bullies.
Yeah.
So my whole like sort of adolescence was like fighting and like trying to establish the parameters with which I would allow people to treat me a certain way. And once it got to the point where it was like, okay, now there's like these gangs of bullies and blah, blah, blah. I developed like this kind of persona at a very young age that was like kind of funny and outgoing. And it was like this defense mechanism I used to basically defend myself.
Sure.
And so I've always sort of had this like kind of big personality and this huge smile and been like, hey, what's going on? No, I'm cool, like blah, blah, blah. And that kind of, I think, drove this desire for performance, right? I had to sort of perform my way out of a lot of situations from a very early age. And so, of course, I was going to school for theater. And the funny thing was, I was like, I want to be an actor. And my mother was like, I'm not paying for you to go to school to be an actor. And so my major was English, but my minor was theater. Then my second year when I switched, my mother refused to pay for it anymore. And so that's when I really started working, because from that point on, I had to pay for my own college.
Sure.
And then like 6 months later, I get discovered and become a model. And then, I was like, well, forget all that, because I thought that was my way in.
So you use that performative skill to kind of, you got basically tired of fighting and you were like, how else can I diffuse this situation? And you had to turn the charm on. But behind that charm must have been, I mean, for me too, because I know I was like one of those kids who I came from a kind of a crazy growing up family. My grandmother raised me as well. And that was my performing and my entertaining was my way of kind of, I would always be able to talk my way or get my way out of situations because of your charm. But I know from myself, behind that charm usually lies a lot of pain, a lot of anguish. And I think obviously you coming up, a gay black man in a black community where it's a frowned upon thing. So that to be charming, you had to be overly charming to overcompensate for so many things. And I'm sure that, led you to being in performing and led you to just being who you are today.
Well, I was it definitely made me, I was an introvert, but it made me an extrovert. And it served me well. Because all of a sudden people wanted to help me. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, Marcellas is so funny. Oh, he's the greatest guy. He's so smart. He's so cute. So like when bullies would like come up to me, like girls would step in and they would be like, don't talk to him like that. Leave him alone. That's my friend. I all of a sudden had this gang of like girlfriends that would come to my rescue when things went down. And then I got a job really early at like 15 in retail. Mm-hmm. And that changed everything because I was supposed to be a stock boy, but I would talk it was an all women's clothing store. And I would talk to the women.
You must have
and the women would come up to me and they would be like, what do you think of this sweater? And I'd be like, yes, girl, you should get that. It comes in red as well as pink. Oh, you know what? You could go a size down. And my boss, who was this like tiny little Jewish woman, she saw that. And she was like, get off the ladder and get on the sales floor. And I always say this now, and my mother hates it because it just like sort of dawned on me within the last couple of years. My mother was basically like pimping me out because I was working in this high-end retail.
I'm sure she loves that terminology for you.
That's right. So I'm working in this high-end women's clothing store, and I'm making, like when I was a stock boy, I'd make like, what, $300 a week before tax if I was lucky because It was just hourly. But all of a sudden I'm making commission, and I'm like the best salesperson in the store and like the number 3 salesperson in the company at like 16 years old. I'm bringing home $1,200 checks.
At that time?
And I had no idea that like people didn't normally bring home $1,200 checks.
That's all you knew.
I'm sending my checks over to my mother, and she's like depositing them in her account, and she's still giving me like $100 a week allowance.
Just want to keep you honest.
So I'm like literally paying the rent in the house and her clothes because she's shopping at Neiman Marcus. And I'm like, man, I'm getting $100 a week to get on the bus, go to school, get on the bus, go to work, have lunch, and live my life. And she's taking all my money. I feel like Gary Coleman's parents. Like,
you're the consummate. That was the child star story right there. Yeah.
holy.
She may have been pimping you out. I don't know. You might be.
Like now in retrospect, I wish I was making $1,200 a week, like during COVID. And so now I'm looking around and I'm like, she took all my money.
She invested in you at a young age, so I'm sure it's reparations for growing up. So then you obviously had an amazing rapport with women. Obviously, as a gay man, I'm sure you felt there was a lot of that feminine kind of energy. What really made you obsessed with? Obviously, you were charming and you could talk to people, and I think the first rule of sales obviously is being able to just be likable and people to connect with you. When did you always have the eye for fashion? Did you know this goes with this, or this line is going to be, this? Like, where do you learn that?
So I grew up in a house with a single mother, and I grew up in a house with my grandfather and grandmother lived in the same building we lived in. My grandparents owned a 3-flat. Mm-hmm. And we lived on one floor, they lived on another floor, and then they would rent out, and then she would rent out the top floor. My grandmother was, she was from that school where you wore gloves and a hat and shoes that all matched. Mm-hmm. So I would see her get dressed on Sundays to go to church, and it was like a fashion show. Black church is like a fashion show. It's like New York Fashion Week to the umpteenth.
The hats and the
outfits are crazy. And my mother, I also say I love my mother, but my mother suffered from pretty girl syndrome. She did. And so she was, colorism is a really big thing in the Black community. So my mother was like fair skinned, much fairer than me. And she had quote unquote good hair. And she was very thin. And so everything looked great on her, but she loved clothes and she understood the power of clothes. So one day she would be like all 70s out in a pair of bell bottoms and like a t-shirt that said Black Power or Right On or Moving On or Hanging There Kitty, And then the next day she would be in like, some like tight leather dress on her way like to work, you know what I mean? So I saw that and I was like transfixed by these two incredible, beautiful Black women and the process of getting dressed. Like it was theater for them. It made them feel good. The whole process of their bath before and doing their hair before and putting on their makeup and picking out what they were going to wear, and then of course they left my ass at home. So then when the door, all until they got to the front door and slammed the door behind them, and left their reality to walk out into a new reality. And I think that's where I got my love of fashion.
So were you playing around with their clothes? Were you like figuring it all out or?
I wasn't playing around with their clothes necessarily. I do distinctly remember my mother helping my mother bedazzle her jeans. Back in the day, there was this thing called the bedazzler.
I remember.
You put the thing in and you did this. So I do remember that moment. But I do remember also being very particular about what I would wear. So, and then another ritual we had was with both of them. On Saturdays, we would go shopping. And my cousin and my brother were like always running around the store and being loud. And so my mother and my grandmother would be like, look, if you can't be good, I'm not taking you. So they were never good. So they got left at home and I was very good. So I went with them. And there were perks to going with them because we had lunch at the Walnut Room at Marshall Fields.
Oh, yeah, that's a big, yeah. I'm from Detroit. So like Detroit, Chicago, like I know all of those old like big box classic, Marshall Fields was like, yeah.
It was like Mecca.
Sure.
And there were all these other little perks where it was like my grandmother would be like, oh, we got to go to Stop and Shop and I got to get this cake I like. And my mother would be like, well, we got to go to Neiman Marcus and I got to get this caramel apple I like. And then they would be like, well, if you're good, I'll take you to Garrett's Popcorn.
Oh
So
yeah.
even to this day, I equate like sweets with like being good and a
Mm.
reward,
Do
which
you
is
have
why I'm fat as hell during
I was gonna
COVID.
say, do you have a sweet tooth? Do you
Yes. So
order Garrett's? Because you can order Garrett's now from the.
my sister just sent me a big ass tin of it for my
With
birthday,
the
which was
cheddar
in
and the
November.
caramel and the regular, like the whole thing.
Right? The mix. I ate so much of it that I got sick, and literally at like 2 o'clock in the morning, I grabbed the tin and I go out to the garbage can, mass be damned, and I'm like, it's got to go.
So I would say, I mean, your mother was your clear. Was it your mother or your grandmother? Who was your like hero of your childhood?
My grandmother was the hero of my childhood because she was the first person that acknowledged my gayness in a positive way. Um, my mother was the hero of my childhood in this very practical, sort of stylistic, we're going to get through this sort of way. Because there were times when we were really poor, and then there were times when we were like flush. And it all had to do with what job she had, who she was dating, blah, blah, blah. So I got very sort of used to like sort of going with the flow, rolling with the punches, and acclimating to things as they happen.
Definitely a survivalist mentality. So having that, like, there clearly as a, you didn't grow up with a father figure in your house and being gay, like that's a huge hurdle to overcome. How did you deal with not having that positive role model in your life, that positive
Well,
male influence?
I mean, that's such a big thing. I did have a role model. My grandfather was very good with me. He owned his own construction company, a very small construction company. He was a mason.
Mm.
And so he was a member of the union and was like a cement worker and would pour cement and that kind of thing. But he also had a very small construction company. And my grandfather was great with me because my brother, a bunch of guys in the neighborhood worked for him. And so did my brother and my cousin. But he never asked me to work with him because he knew that wasn't my thing.
Right.
But he would be like, come here, boy, and help me fix and help me write this contract. Because I had really good penmanship. You know what I mean? So I would sit there and he would tell me what to put on the contract. And I would write it out like really precisely. And then he would be like, now sign my name to it. And I would sign his name. And he would be like, all right. And then he would give me like money. You know what I mean? And so he was a very positive role model because he never treated me unkindly. He actually made me feel very special. That said, all the men around me who weren't my grandfather were troubling for a little Black gay kid.
Yeah.
And it made me a target for unwanted attention from men in general. So for years, I had problems with other Black men, and I really had to work on fixing those issues, which were exacerbated when I got out into the world, because when you are a person of color and you're working in certain fields, there's an idea that I call onlyness. Like there's only space for one person of color. So automatically you saw like any other person of color as a threat, right? And so I definitely dealt with that. Being a Black model in the 90s, yeah. Oh my God, I dealt with that. But now I like to say I'm evolved and I've gotten better, but it took a long time to get better. And it actually took, I'm a therapy person. I haven't been in a while. I probably should do it now that we're in COVID, but it took a lot of therapy also because I had to figure out this sort of idea that I was struggling with, where as a Black person and a person and a member of the LGBTQI community, I felt less than myself. So I had to work on those issues also. And that breakthrough came very recently. That breakthrough maybe started in 2015, but it really got the message in 2018.
Wow. That's, it's really interesting. I really can, understand your, like I grew up, my father was an alcoholic and he actually died a couple years back. It wasn't one of those guys who was super abusive, but it was just like come on, like you'd never get it, together. So I didn't have that kind of positive male force in my life growing up. And then I was a professional dancer. So being around women was my superpower. Like I knew how to navigate that. And so it wasn't until I really started going to a lot of therapy that I had to understand how to. I started going to like Al-Anon groups, and I made sure that I chose a men's group because I realized I'm not as much as I can get down with the guys and hang out. If I know someone, I'm comfortable with them. But being in a room of guys that I don't know, I'm like, it's a very weird thing. It's a really hard process to undo. So I could see how you would, especially with fashion and being a gay man, you would want to pour yourself into, the women that are around you.
It helped too because when I was a model, so the thing that's interesting about fashion is I say that fashion saved my life because at key points during my journey, fashion did save my life. When I was 15, I started working in a retail store, and that kept me sort of out of the streets, right? That sort of kept me on the straight and narrow because I had to be at work at a certain time, and I worked for a certain time. And that was the first place where somebody actually told me that my gayness was okay, other than maybe my grandmother in passing. And also was the first place that I was exalted for being me, right? So fashion definitely saved my life at a key point in my journey where I could have gone a lot of different ways. It gave me a sense of self and a sense of self-respect, which is incredibly important. Then when I became a model, it sort of changed my eye because quickly I left the country and I started traveling globally. And that, as an American, changes your eye because you grow up and there's two Americas. There's white America and there's black America. But when I got outside of America, I saw how there are places in the world that don't deal with racism and even homophobia in the same way that Americans do.
Yeah.
And it actually gave me a greater appreciation for who I was and a greater understanding of my limitations and where I could go and what I could do.
And where was that first place that you found that you were like outside of the US that you felt the most at home?
London.
I love that city.
The first market I went to was London. And it was perfect because it's overseas, but they still speak English.
Right.
And I went to London, I had this moment where I was like the king of American catalogs, because I was like an idiot. I was like jumping around and smiling and running while all the other male models are trying to be all cool. I was like, yay! You know what I mean? And photographers and clients loved that. So, but all my friends were like these editorial boys. And here I was, the catalog boy who bought his first condo at 1997. And then these slacker editorial boys were sleeping on my floor because they couldn't afford rent. All these straight boys were sleeping on my floor. Meanwhile, it's my condo, with the doorman and all the accoutrements because I'm pulling down 6 figures as a model, and they're not. Right. But they have these beautiful books and they're working with the best photographers in the world. So I was like, I'm going to go to London and I'm going to build my book up there, become editorial, and come back to the United States. Well, I get to London and basically I'm doing the exact same thing I was doing in the United States with an accent. So I'm jumping around for Jigsaw and jumping around for Marks and Spencer and jumping around for Harrods. And I was like, this sucks. I came here because I wanted to do Arena and The Face and ID. You know what I mean? Sure. So I had friends who were in Milan. And so I ended up going to Milan instead of staying in London where I was making money. And I was making a lot of money because the pound was stronger than the dollar. And I became that boy that was working 2, 3, 4 times a week and getting on the train and going to Paris and working. But I went my black butt to Milan where there was no market for black boys.
Not a beautiful city either. It's not like a...
It was like Detroit.
Yeah, it's very industrial. Yeah.
I left beautiful historic London and the Tuileries in Paris to go to ghetto ass Milan and be 8 to a room during Fashion Week. There were 8 meat sacks, 8 guys in a one room with a bathroom. We were lucky there wasn't a bathroom down the hall. At least we had a bathroom en suite. But can you imagine waiting outside the door with 8 guys?
No.
Trying to get ready to go to castings?
No, for sure not. It is
But it
funny
was the
though.
most fun I'd ever had in my life.
See, that's the trade-off. But it is funny because my ex is a really big fashion photographer in New York, and she does a lot of commercial work. And I remember, like, when you think about fashion, you think about the books, you think about the like fancy stuff, and she's like, that makes you no money. She's like, you do that because it's the prestige and the things are nice, but if you want to buy yourself a house, you want these big campaigns from these big companies. So
Yes. I mean, I was jumping around for like Target, and I was jumping around for like Zare and Montgomery Ward, like all these, like every department store I think in the country I worked for at some point. And all my friends were like doing like Arena, or they were doing GQ, or they were all working for Bruce Weber, like naked basically. Yeah. And I was like, I want to do like that cool stuff. Right. Meanwhile, they couldn't afford to do anything because they're getting like $40 a day to shoot these magazines. And I'm flying off to like Minneapolis to do Target. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to get on a plane. Make them pay more. You know what I mean? And so I'm getting like $2,500 a day and doing like 2 shots and getting back on the plane and going back home. And they're like, but they're doing the cool stuff. But I did shave my head, and that changed everything. And then I started doing the cool stuff. But it sort of...
What did you have? What kind of hair? Did you have like, was it 90s? Was it...
No, I just had... Okay, so here's the deal. I'm going to tell you the story about the hair. Because it's crazy. So I had an afro a really long time. Like afros are in now. Yeah. But there was a point when an afro was not in. It was after the ridiculousness of like Kid and Play with the squares. Yeah. So they killed the afro for the black person. So I had like this kind of big curly thing that was like shaved on the sides and short like on the nape. And my curl pattern was really beautiful. So one day I go to my stylist, because I had to go to a woman's salon to get those beautiful curls. And I go to my stylist and I was like, what do you think? And she was like, you're feeling a little dry. I'm going to give you a cellophane. And I was like, well, I don't want a color. And she's like, it's not going to be a color. It's going to be brown. And it's going to just give you this richness that you're lacking. So I was like, okay, this cellophane was burgundy, for lack of a better word. So I go to my boyfriend's house, who has this beautiful 4-poster bed and has these 500 thread count Protese sheets, the whole 9 yards, in this beautifully styled loft. And I'm like, I think my hair is burgundy. And he's like, well, it doesn't look bad. And I was like, I don't want a hair color. So finally he puts me in bed. The next morning I wake up and it was like Alien Autopsy all over the sheets. The burgundy had gotten everywhere.
No. Oh.
So I ran to the barber and shaved my head as short as I possibly could without it being bald. And literally that was the moment where everybody was like, you should be a model, you should be a model, you should be a model.
Wait, did he kill you for messing up his sheets?
And do you know that wonderful child of God made me pay for those sheets? I was like...
Did that end that relationship?
No, I did that dance for a really long time with that cheap bastard.
Oh my God. That's hysterical. So obviously you have this transition from, being in front of the camera to now creating these amazing books. The whole Supreme series is just, the books are gorgeous. They're large format. They feel like, yeah, there you go. Just open a page real quick. I want people to see how beautiful. Get you
a copy of. It always opens to this picture of Grace Jones. I think that's the actual middle of the book. And so Grace Jones, oh my God, but look at this business. Leah Kabede, one of the top models ever, and her amazing Vogue Paris cover.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
The thing about the book is it's really, you open to any page and there's something beautiful on the page. Like this is important because Precious Lee is probably right now one of the top models in the world, but she's also a plus model. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important to me
I know
to
Precious.
Include.
I know Precious.
Do you know Precious?
Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
It was very important to me to include.
She's in New York, yeah.
Plus model. She
that
is in New York,
yeah,
but she
okay.
spends a lot of time in California too.
I know her. We used to work out at the same gym for like super small world, but yeah.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, I love that girl.
Hysterical.
Her energy is
getting on a plane going to New York, and she, oh gosh, she messed me up actually.
Oh no, oh no.
Okay, so she's behind me. We're getting on the plane, and I think we're both in like business class because we're doing the red eye to New York. And so she's behind me in line, and I turn around and I see her, and she's stunning. So I was like, oh my God, you're very beautiful. And she was like, oh, thank you. That's so sweet. And I was like, well, who are you? Clearly you're a model. And she's like, oh, my name is Precious. And I was like, your mama named you Precious? And she was like, no, it's a long story because her real name is Victoria. So anyway.
Which is such a beautiful name.
I'm a stylist. I'm headed to New York I'm doing the Meredith Vieira show because I used to be Meredith Vieira's gay. Mm-hmm. So
used to be her gay.
Meredith Vieira's gay.
Is that on your resume like that?
It should be because I had so much fun with her. So I was the gay guy that would come on the show and do makeovers and like makeover real women. And then she liked me so much that she started putting me on the panels. So I was the gay guy that was on her panels. And basically I would sit there and be like this crazy person, as you know. And
that's where we met. We met on a panel.
We met on a panel and she would just sit there and laugh. I mean, we had the best time. So I was her gay. So basically that was what I was supposed to do. I'd come on the show and I would be like super gay. So anyway, it was like the red eye gets you in at like 5 o'clock in the morning and the Meredith show sent a car for me. So Precious was like, didn't have a car. So I was like, well, I have a car. Like, where do you live? The car will drive you.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I live in Brooklyn. So no, she was like, I live in Harlem. So I was like, I don't know New York. After all these years of living in New York, going to New York, whatever, I've only spent my time in Nolita.
Yeah. So
unless I'm working, and maybe on the Upper West Side. So I was like, oh, well, just get in the car. So I get in the car with the driver, and the driver is clearly annoyed. And I was like, well, she lives in Harlem. Isn't that like, right down Madison Avenue? And the driver was like, whatever.
Isn't everything right there? That is a perception. It's only an island.
This girl lives in the bowels of Harlem. We were driving for like hours.
She's like 185 and, whatever. Yeah. You're like, wait a minute.
And the driver was pissed.
You're like, this is New Jersey. Oh, no.
Like when I got to set that morning, there was a note on my door that said, see, whoever the controller was, it was like, see somebody. And he was like, did you go to Harlem?
Why is this car service $450? Yeah. Why is this $500 for this car service? So you obviously have made amazing relationships with all of these black models and these female models, and obviously the timing of the book seems intentional and appropriate. I mean, it's amazing that a book like this didn't exist already, but I think now in the climate of where we are, it's even more important right now. Was that a conscious effort?
So there's a couple of things there, right? There's a couple of things to unpack. I'm going to try to unpack them quickly and not be so long-winded with you,
This is where you can be long-winded, baby. Don't worry.
Okay, good. So I came up with the idea in 2011, right? I collect art books. That's my thing. Mm-hmm. As an artist, as a model, and as a stylist, there's a lot of research involved in both of those fields, right? A good model should know photographers and stylists and fashion designers. They should also keep an eye out for who's doing what. And I think when you look at historic pictures, you sort of learn how to move and create shapes and actually be like an actor without words. So I started reading magazines voraciously and looking at images and devouring them when I was a model. And then when I became and that sort of led to me having this sort of fashion-y eye, because I had always loved magazines, even in high school. So I'd always, even growing up, I'd read my grandmother had Essence, and she had a magazine called Jet.
Oh, yeah,
no,
Jet.
My grandmother had Ebony and a magazine called Jet. which is this tiny little ghetto magazine that gave you like the Jet Beauty of the Week. And believe me, most of those beauties of the week were not beautiful, but whatever. So, and then my mother had Essence, and every now and then the odd like Vogue would come into the house. If somebody Black was on the cover, she would get the Vogue. And so I read those magazines voraciously. And so even when I was in high school, I knew about designers. You know, I knew about designers that I had never seen because I knew about them from the magazines. And that served me very well as I moved through my life. And so a book in 2011 came out called Vogue Model, The Faces of Fashion. It's the British Vogue book, and it's huge, and it was expensive. And it had like 100 models in it. And that book only had 2 Black models in it out of all these models that had appeared in British Vogue. Wow. And so I read it all the way to the end. As soon as I got it, Amazon dropped it on my, you know, they drop it. I opened the door to take the trash out and it was on the landing. And so I ripped it open and read it. And so at 2:00 in the morning, like I was done. And then I discovered there was only 2 people. And I thought, well, maybe you fell asleep while you were reading and you skipped somebody. So I went back through and looked at the, you know, and looked at the table of contents. And no, it was only Iman and Naomi Campbell. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? So if you go on Amazon to this day, there's a review from me giving that book 1 star. Amazing. And the review is like the Kermit the Frog, you know, the Kermit the Frog emoji where he's like this. This is me at 2:00 in the morning. Like, where is Valerie? Where is Veronica Webb? Where is Leah Capiti? Where is Alec Weck? Where is Donia Luna? And right then, that moment was the genesis for this book. Like right then, I was like, wait, I have all these art books that are about fashion, about models, but none of them are as comprehensive as they should be about the contributions of Black models to fashion. Black models have historically been muses to some of the world's greatest designers. And so I looked around on Amazon, and there were a couple of books that were similar, but they weren't what I was trying to do. They weren't like oversized, hard copy, hardcover, right? They weren't full bleed. The best photographers in the world shooting the best models in the world. And so that was the genesis. That's when I decided to do this book. And it took 8 years for it to happen. I didn't sell the book until 2018. Wow. And the book didn't come out until 2019 in the fall. And along the way, several publishers, not several, but 3 different publishers, the 4th said yes. 3 different publishers told me to my face after taking a meeting with me. And at different points, I was like kind of famous because of Big Brother and because of E! And because of the Meredith Vieira show and blah, blah, blah. 3 different publishers told me to my face that there was no market for a book about Black women. In that verbiage. Wow. And I was like, you do realize I'm Black, right? Like, Jesus. I know I talk a certain way, but
the publishing world though is such a, they're so up their own ass and they don't know what they want, and you can give them all of these amazing things and they're so afraid to take a chance. I've pitched books, I've released books, you know, but they're never without their hurdles, but it's more of like they want more of the same. It's safe. They have their big buildings that they have to pay these giant rents to. Nobody wants to take a chance on anything or go outside of the box. But you would think in 2018, 19, they would be smart enough to at least go, hey, let's turn on the news and see what's happening. Let's see that, you know, the Black community especially was really having a megaphone, you know, at that point.
I think, so the last time somebody told me no was 2015, right? And then I got busy in my TV career, and so I sort of put the book down because I was really brokenhearted by that. That last one was the 2015 rejection was like a game-ending blow for me, where I was like, because they had said yes originally, and we got it to the point where we were going to take it out,
I've been there.
to
I've been there.
what do you call it?
Shop
To
it.
auction.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And at the last minute, the president of the company was like, "No, I don't think this is a book. You know, it's not going to work." And so I had to pick myself up and get back into the fray. But I also was like working all the time, so it was like, okay, well, I'm making money, so let's just put it down. But in 2017, a couple of things happened. Meredith Vieira's show had been canceled, so I wasn't working on camera as much at all. Nobody would see me, actually. It was so crazy. After all these years in kind of LA and in quote unquote Hollywood, I just hit this wall where, I mean, I had like contracts with E for years and had done so much work for E and had done the Oscars for them live from the red carpet and had shows on E and on Style Network when they had their own freestanding fashion network. Yeah. And then I got to the point where they wouldn't even take a meeting with me anymore. And I mean, I think the straw that broke the camel's back for me was when they did the Queer Eye reboot. Mm-hmm. I reached out to my agent and I was like, hey, get me in on that. I'd love to take a meeting with those guys because I knew them.
Right.
And my agent reached out to them and they said to her, oh, he's too old.
Jesus.
And I was literally like, okay, I'm done. Right. But I was making money as a stylist. So I was like, okay, well, I still have my money, so I'm good. You know, this television thing is really sort of for the ego anyway. And then my biggest client went bankrupt at the end of 2017, wow, owing me tens of thousands of dollars. Oof. And then I, in turn, owed my agency, Ford, who I had been with since 1997 as a model and then a stylist. I owed Ford $20,000 because they had been advancing me money. They had been advancing me the money that I had worked off with the client.
Right.
That's how it works. You work that week, you turn in your voucher Friday, you get a check the following Friday. Right. But when the client went under, they were like, well, we advanced you $20,000. Now you have to pay us back. And so now I'm scrambling to find new clients and to work, and they wouldn't give me a check until I paid the $20,000 back. So it was just this culmination. It was like the perfect storm of everything. Then my second biggest client hired an on-staff stylist, so they didn't want me. And it was like I wasn't working as a host. I wasn't working as a stylist. I've never been, as you see, I've never been the kind of person that could save, as you see, I've never been the kind of person that could save money. And I was literally still hemorrhaging money because I was still living, I had my Soho House Everywhere membership and I was still living, high on the hog. Like I was pulling down 100 plus a year, but I wasn't.
Right.
And then at the beginning of 2018, when I was like, basically like, destitute. I had a conversation with my hosting agent here in LA, and we were talking about how I wasn't working, blah, blah, blah. It was kind of becoming an argument, right? It was like testy because I was like kind of desperate. And I was like, what about my book? What did Penguin say about my book? And she was like, I pitched that book to everybody and nobody's interested. And I hung up on her, right? I was like, I'm going to go before this becomes, before I say something that I can't come back from. And I went to Facebook and I posted on Facebook, does anybody know a literary agent? And one of my oldest friends who I met in 1995 when I started modeling, we met when I was coming back from a job and I had my suitcase with me and I was in Burger King. And he was like, that guy looks like a model. And I heard him say it and I turned around and I was like, well, I am. And we became like best friends. We've been friends for years. He replied, he was the only person that replied to that post. Cause that's one of those Facebook posts that nobody gives a shit about because there's no picture.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he replied to that post and he's like, my cousin's a literary agent. What do you need? And I was like, excuse me, bitch, don't you know I have a book? And he was like, bitch, I don't know your life. And I was like, I've been talking about this book since 2011. He was like, well, I thought you had a publisher. And I was like, I lost them. And he was like, oh. So he called his cousin. A week later, I reached out to him and I was like, what did your cousin say about, because he asked me to send my book proposal. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what did your cousin say about the book proposal? He was like, oh, let me check. And he goes back to her and he's like, oh, she's been on vacation. She's going to read it right now. So my broke fancy ass was sitting at Soho House where you can't get calls. Yeah. And all of a sudden my phone starts ringing and it's Tom. So I sent it to voicemail and he calls back. I sent it to voicemail again. He calls back. So I get up, I go outside because I'm like pissed now. And I'm like, who died? So I get up and I go outside and I'm like, what do you want? I'm at Soho House. And he was like, my cousin wants to talk to you. And I was like, your cousin, the literary agent? He was like, yeah. And so I was like, well, tell her to call me. I was like, tell her to text me. And he was like, bitch, she wants to talk to you right now. What is wrong with you? And I was like, oh, right. So I was like, okay, tell her to call me. And he was like, she's not going to call you. You call her right now. So he texted me the number. I called her. And it was this little like, this sounds so bad, but it was this little white girl with this kind of tiny voice, right? And she was like, hi, my name's Allison. And I was like, oh, I know you because I've known Tom forever. Right. And I was still in the mainframe that this girl was like, 14 or something. And she was like, yeah, Tom sent me your proposal. She was like, it's the War and Peace of proposals, but there's something there. And I was like, little white girl, what you know about a Black book? And she was like, well, I just sold the movie rights to Dapper Dan's book. And I was the person that found Dapper Dan and got him to write a book. And I did a complete 180. I was like, wait, what's your name again?
Oh, wait a minute, little white girl. You may have something to say. It is funny, though, how sometimes we can't get out of our own way. And I've been in this situation as well where I'm like, you're working on something and you expect that everybody just knows how much work you put into something and what you have going on. And most people, they're so tied up with their own lives. No one's worried about your shit. But yet you feel like, well, she should be calling me. The world should be calling me. Yeah. It's hard to get out of your own way.
And I am a victim of that like nobody's business. When I look back at some of the decisions I've made, I've been like, are you stupid? Like, are you brain dead? Are you brain damaged? Like, what were you thinking?
Yeah. So then how long from that point was the release of the book? Like, was it already kind of packaged together or was it just a proposal at this time?
It was just a proposal, but I had been doing interviews with all the models that I could get my hands on from day one.
Right.
So I had like at that point I had like, let's say 25 interviews, maybe 30 interviews with some of the top models ever.
So were you just reaching out cold, or you had rapport with them, or you had relationships, or were you just saying, hey, I'm putting this...
Okay, so I'm going to say this and I'm going to get a little like religious because it seems like you can't say this, but I believe in God and I pray a lot and I like meditate and I read the Bible. My mother sent me a Bible and a knife in a goodie package. That's my mother right there in a nutshell. She gonna send you a Bible and a knife to take care of yourself. So Clarice sent me a Bible and a knife, so I read my Bible, and God gives me comfort. So anyway, I feel like God took everything that was stopping me from writing the book, because that was a gift that he gave to me. He took everything away from me, right? That I defined myself by. So I defined myself by this 6-figure stylist career and being a television host. And he was like, I gave you an idea in 2011 and you haven't honored that idea. And so now I'm going to take all those things out of the way and leave you with nothing. And when that whole thing happened, that reversal of fortune for me happened, all I had was the book. And that was when I sort of gave it the reverence that it deserved. But along the way, he would put people in my path. So I would be in Milwaukee styling, and my client and the girl that I was styling that day was Lana Ogilvie, who was the first Black model to have a Maybelline contract. No, a CoverGirl contract. And so while I'm, helping her get in and out of her clothes, I'm like, girl, I'm writing a book about Black models. Can I interview? And she was like, yes. And then, or I would be out, and then Tamiko Frazier and I bumped into each other. And I was like, girl, I'm writing a book at some LA fashion designer's house in the hills. We were both there for his show. And I was like, girl, I'm writing a book. And she was like, really? And I was like, yeah, it's about Black models. She's like, am I in it? And I was like, yes, you're the first Black model to have a Maybelline contract. Yes, you're in it. And so I interviewed her. And then my friend Shakara Ladari was a Sports Illustrated Victoria's Secret girl that I had worked with in Chicago before she broke through. You know what I mean? And and then when I was doing the Meredith Vieira show, on one of the panels, Veronica Webb, who wrote the foreword for the book, she was one of the guests. And I told her about the book, and she was like, oh, sure, how can I help you? So it was like all along, the universe, God, whatever higher power you believe in, was putting things in my path, even when I wasn't even thinking about the book, to let me know to not let the book go. And when the time was right, he took everything away and left me with only the book and these amazing interviews.
Wow.
And then he opened the door. And once that door started opening, it opened and opened and opened. From the day I signed the contract with Allison, 3 months to the day, I sold the book.
Jesus, wow.
And I sold it to the company I wanted the book to be with. I sold it to the publisher I wanted it. I sold it to Abrams. Books.
Yeah, I saw that. It's pretty amazing when you think of all of these things that I'm sure the point in time in your life, the Soho membership, the 6 figures, the apartment, the whatever, seemed like comforts to you, when in fact they were obstacles to your true joy. And until that was removed, like you said, and I love the word you used, you said reverence. Because with reverence is a great respect that comes with something. And I think we're in this like fast, notion of things come and go and whatever. And like this is a huge piece of work that should have reverence paid to it. So all of those things had to, by whatever power, had to be removed for you to be able to only focus on the thing you needed to focus on. I think that's brilliant.
I mean, at the time, it was painful.
Of course it's painful.
It was a time of incredible growth, because I had defined myself by my things and by this idea of money and affluence. But I think you grow the most as a person right after the storm, right? If you can get through the storm, if you can get through the horrible parts, right? And you can then take a moment and breathe and look back on the storm, that's where you grow. And you can learn those lessons. I learned so many lessons about what was important and not important in the process of getting the book deal, and in the process of the year before the book actually came out. Because I still, when I was done with the book, you give the book to your publisher and then you wait for it to come out.
Well, yeah, unless you have a big advance, you're still not making, the book's not making you any money.
And I didn't get a great advance. Yeah. It was 3 other publishers had told me no.
Right.
I was still in this space of, there was, it was still a risk for Abrams to do this book, which I find to be kind of bullshit, because when you look at Abrams' resume, they do books on knitting. So you gonna sit here and you gonna do a book about knitting and you gonna tell me, okay, let me pull back, because I'm very grateful. I'm grateful. I'm sitting in the seat of gratitude.
It is so, trust me, that's the crazy thing about this business, is that you end up looking like that scene in A Beautiful Mind where you're trying to figure out all this. You're like, wait, I'm doing all these things and I'm doing, but this over here. And that's the other thing, is you also, it's so hard not to get caught up in other successes or other things that are published. Why would they do that? My idea is so much better. Why did not, but it is a blessing, the fact that you were even able to, I had this conversation the other day where in our business, I feel like you're always asking for permission. You're always asking, and you as a gay black man, always having to ask for space and fight for that space. And now being in the fortunate position to be able to create your own work, you're not even seeing the forest for the trees. The fact that you were able to create this work and be thankful in that, because you're like, well, no, I should be able to have this. When you go like, fuck, I've put this amazing book together. I have all these interviews already. It's hard. It's so hard. And I'm glad you have a meditation practice, and I'm glad you have, belief in a higher power, because it is hard to have that gratitude or like to stop and smell the roses and say, oh, you know what? I've come a long way, which you have.
Okay, so two things. So this is really random, but I'm this gay fashion guy, right? So I know all these models, and I've been having these conversations I wrote a book, so I have conversations all the time with models. But one of my friends, her name is Eugena Washington, and she did America's Next Top Model. Mm-hmm. And Eugena should have won her season, right? But Tyra was very aggressive with Eugena and was into this idea with, you need to be more humble. You have to humble yourself. And Eugena was like, I'm not going to be humble. Mm-hmm. I'm great. I need to believe that I'm great, because so often as a person of color, I'm told I'm not great.
Yeah.
So telling me to be humble because you think I'm not humble actually is a lie, and it's not true. And so I when she said that, it resonated with me so much, because I've always had to, from being this kid who was always told that he was bad, or that he was a sinner, or that he was an abomination, or that
well, you should just be happy to be here, especially as a black gay man.
Happy to exist, right? And so somehow I had to develop this sense of self that was like, I am the greatest thing that ever walked the face of the earth. And if you don't understand that, you're dumb, or you're crazy, or da-da-da-da. When I was a model, my first season in Miami, there were 4 of us in 1-bedroom apartment, 2 girls and 2 guys. And the guy was a straight guy who was like one of my best friends. And two girls one of the girls was with my true best friend. The other girl, we didn't know. She was like some 17-year-old girl. They just plopped in. And I would always say, because I was going on these castings in Miami and there were 300 people and you're number 286, and you're in Miami and like the hottest guys in the world. I mean, when I was modeling, it was Tyson Beckford, Boris Kojo, Jason Olive. Those were the black boys, and Richard Elm. Those were the black boys that were working. But the white boys that were working were like Mark Vanderloo and Jason Lewis and Jason Shaw and Enrique, whatever his last name is, Palacios. Yes. So there were like these incredible boys that were just killing it. And they would be at the same casting my skinny ass was. And so I had to develop this idea, and I would always say, I am a box of Godiva in a room full of Russell Stovers. And my roommates would always be like, here we go. And so I would actually somebody would like be like around me or near me, and I would be like, Nestle's Quick, Godiva. Russell Stovers, Godiva. See's Chocolate, Godiva. I had to develop this kind of weird, almost psychotic swagger to just keep going, to just block out the negativity and the no's that you constantly get. And so you're right. You have to have that sense of
belief is such an important factor of it. And like for me, I think it's this foolish optimism, and I think it's the way that I've actually been able to have success the same way. Like I was a, middle class straight white guy growing up in Detroit, and I'm like, I'm gonna be a professional dancer, and everyone was like, you're fucking crazy. And I never for a moment, I love performing, I love that. I was like, I'm gonna move to LA, I'm gonna do film, I'm gonna do television, and I never for a moment doubted that. And I think that's the thing that so many people are their own worst enemy, where they put those roadblocks up in front of them and they don't realize, like the first person tells them no, and they go, okay, well, I guess I'm not allowed to take up this kind of space. I guess I don't have permission to be here. And having, especially as yourself and myself, having gone into rooms and been told no hundreds of times, you do develop, a tough skin, and then you understand, you're like, okay, you understand who you are, and you understand what it takes to make it to the next level. Then I was like, oh, I want to go to culinary school. I never thought for a moment that I wasn't going to become a chef and do fine dining and write books and people still think you're crazy, but you have to create that persona, because it isn't just the most talented, the person that has the best voice isn't the number one artist in the world, right? It's a person who has that swagger and that persona and something that other people look at, and whether it's fake or not, they see that and they go, shit, that's like, it's a powerful thing. It is a superpower of yours.
It's manifestation, right? It's, you decide you've got this voice over here that tells you what you can't do, and you've got this voice over here that tells you what you can do. And you have to decide which voice you listen to. And you have to decide how much credence you give to that voice, right? So yeah, at 2:00 in the morning, I am sitting there in bed and my bank account's not where it wants to be, or we're in COVID, there's protests, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, okay, I can't do all the things that I dream of. But at the same time, I have to turn on that voice that's like, not only can you do all the things that you dream of, look at all the things that you've done that you never thought you could do.
Yes. Yes.
I think my whole journey now, and it took me a while to get here, is about celebrating the accomplishments of people of color.
Yes.
And it's odd because for so long I spent my time feeling bad because I was a person of color. Mm-hmm. Because you're programmed, unfortunately, in this world to feel like you're second class, so no matter how much bravado and swag you have, when somebody's following you in a clothing store who doesn't make as much money as you are, or when you're walking down the street a block away from the house that you own and you get stopped by the policeman, who again doesn't make as much money as you do, isn't as successful as you are, and that strips your pride from you, it's very difficult, to maintain that persona of success, to maintain the energy that it takes to be successful. I don't think people understand all the energy and the desire and the want and the need and the love that it takes to drag yourself out of a bad situation and put yourself in a good situation and stay there. Mm-hmm. Because it's much easier to stay in despair. I always say that there's a quote from a movie called The Red Shoes, and one of the characters says, it's much worse to have to steal than to be stolen from. So I always think, I'm not at this place yet that I have to steal anything, and I'm very happy about that.
But it is, there is a lot of people that do, whether you're black, white, whatever, there's a victim mentality. And I think that a lot of that does come with, there's a lot of, oh, poor me, and a lot of that comes, but having the gratitude practice that you have, something I do at the end of the year, and it's coming up soon. I will go through the year, and it's really easy to remember all the shitty things that happen, especially in 2020. I've lost my job multiple times. I've been up and down, and it's so easy to get wrapped up in the bullshit and the hard stuff. And I will go down and I'll write my wins down for the year. And it's something one of my acting coaches had me do a long time ago. And it's also now I start writing my day by writing in a gratitude journal every day, and I write down for that 5 things I'm thankful for, and it just kind of just takes you out of your own head. You go like, oh, I have a roof over my head, I have this, I have that. We'll figure the rest out later. But I take all those wins, I write them down, and then I burn it at the end of the year, and then it starts everything fresh. And for me, it's I never want to get too bogged down by the lows, and I never want to get too high on the highs. It's just like you have to remember, like, tomorrow's another day to make more money. Tomorrow's another day, or or what can we do today? And for me now, especially, I look at my son and I'm like, I can't. There's no self-pity. There's no time for just wallowing in my own misery, because whether I'm tired, hungover, or whatever, like, my son's still gonna get up. I still have to take care of him. Real life goes on. So having those things that remind you of that. And now you have this book. You have these other projects. This is gonna be a trilogy of books, or is it, how many books are you gonna do?
I'm gonna try to work this into 4, but I've got a solid 3. The next book, Abrams bought the next book.
Amazing.
You know what's so funny is what you just said, like, really resonates with me, because you have to have this belief, I think, eternal optimism, right? You have to have this belief that another door is going to open for you, that the universe is going to support you, that God has got you, right? And so 2020 happens, and I was about to start the second and most important leg of my book tour, right? Because the first part of my book tour started in New York, but I didn't really do New York very well. And then I did Chicago, and Chicago went like gangbusters. Then I took a little break, and then it was like, okay, now it's the spring, and I'm gonna hit New York the way that I should hit New York. And then bang, and I was doing New York, and then I was doing Miami right after it. And Veronica Webb, who wrote the foreword for the book, she was sort of my partner in crime. So we had all these dates planned. Like, we were doing something at the Gucci Wooster bookstore, and that was going to be glamorous with all the models that are in the book because it's Gucci. And then I was talking to the Marc Jacobs bookstore, and I was talking, and I already had something on the decks for the Soho House, Brooklyn, for Dumbo House. Yeah. Because my original book release party, the night it came out, was at Soho House in Meatpacking. So, and then I was going to Miami to do something at Soho Beach House. So I had all these things planned. And the universe is like, fabulous, not today. Put on your bathrobe, stockpile toilet paper, buy a bidet. It's like, how do you turn and pivot, and how do you regroup? Because I've got 40,000 books that need to be sold, right? And I still haven't
recouped your advance.
Recouped the $70,000 in licensing fees that this book cost, which was twice what they estimated that the licensing fees would be, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God. But I never stop hustling. I never stop moving. I'm like this weird shark where every day I'm sending out emails or text messages and I'm bothering people. And I applied that to promoting this book. I didn't wait for Abrams PR to promote my book. I started promoting my book, right? So I was hitting up, I would read an article on Vogue or High Snobriety, and I would see who wrote that. And then I would go and I would find their email address and I would send them a note about this book. And that's why this book is the #1 fashion book of 2020 and the best reviewed fashion book of 2020, because I never let up.
Well, it's funny. Well, to your point, no one sells you like you. That's why, like, I have an agent, I have all these things, but I end up bringing them things and then they end up working the deal. I'm just like, what the fuck am I paying you for? If you're listening, Alec.
What am I paying you for? No, that was literally the argument that spurred the book.
It's frustrating.
Right?
It's frustrating.
In 2017, I'm like, how are you not getting me work? Because if I'm not working, you're not working. You're not making money. But you're paying. So obviously that means you're paying more attention to somebody else and not me.
Well, no one's in the business of nurturing talent anymore, and that's the unfortunate thing, is that they aren't. They
pick up a phone.
They pick up a phone, and most of the time it goes back to the old publishing thing, where they want the safe bet, or there's something that they didn't have to cultivate. They find a YouTube star who already had a following, and then they end up just doing all the deals. So
whoever was on Top Shelf this month, exactly. Whoever won Top Shelf gets a book deal.
Exactly.
Or whatever politician is disgraced gets a book. You know what I mean? So,
well, I just want to address some of these quotes, because you kind of touched on that. Vogue, one of the 9 best fashion books of 2019. Essence, the #1 fashion book to read about black style. And the reason I chose, well, even to go to the other Vogue quote, fashion devotees will find glorious images of supermodels such as Iman, Tyra Banks, Naomi Campbell, Joan Smalls. How do I say it? Adwa? Adwa. Okay.
Nice.
Adwa. Abwa. Alongside interviews and personal essays. So I want to kind of take this all the way back, talking about your mom. Your mom having Essence in the house. Your mom bringing Vogue from time to time in the house. Her son has a book that is being mentioned in those. I mean, like, I get emotional about those things. Like, that's got to feel incredible to know that, like, you saw those, you've seen Essence since you were a little kid, and now you're in it, being mentioned for something that you created. That is a incredible, incredible transition.
It's an incredible, if this was the Marvel universe, that would be my origin story, right?
Of course.
Like, if fashion is my superpower, that would be where I got my superpower. It's not lost on me. I'm grateful for it. The craziest thing that ever happened is that my mother sent me a photo like maybe 2 months ago, and now my book sits on her cocktail table as soon as you come into the house. And it's got its own little stand, and it's sitting there on the stand, right next to a stack of magazines, you know what I mean? And it's in pride of place. So everybody that comes into her home sees this book, and she can say, my son wrote a book. And what did your son do? You know what I mean? So it's not lost on me. And unfortunately, my grandmother passed away, decades ago. But I know that this is the book that she would have been so incredibly proud that, as a woman from the deep South, who was a maid, right? Who had limited dreams about what her life could be, but dreamed that the lives of her children and grandchildren would be so much more. I'm living my grandmother's dream. Oof. I'm living the dreams of my ancestors, and that's not lost on me.
Well, I have chills. I'm going to end the formal part of the interview right there, because that's like, it's not going to get any better than that as far. But I'm going to give you like a little lightning round of just, what did you learn about yourself in 2020 and during COVID?
I want to say I'm fantastic, but what I learned about myself.
You love bathrobes. That's what
I love bathrobes, and I should do a line of bathrobes.
Wait, what do you mean should? This is we're gonna
right
20%, but find your speed.
What I learned about myself is I have resilience and strength that I didn't know I had. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I realized that that I can go with the flow, right? That I can adapt to any situation. But 2020 really tested a lot of people, and it really tested me.
Yeah. What's your most treasured possession? Yes, I love that. Dual purpose, a little plug. And I mean, that is literally your heart and soul, though. That is the culmination of
my entire life.
Yeah.
Reading my grandmother's Essence, my grandmother's Ebony magazines, reading my mother's Essence magazines, being the little gay kid, the 15-year-old gay boy that works in a store that Oprah Winfrey shopped at, getting discovered and becoming a model, working for Ralph Lauren, living in Italy, living in Milan, becoming a fashion stylist, and then flipping that into becoming a television host and a pundit. It's literally the culmination of my entire life, literally distilled into one thing.
I love that. Who are your heroes of fiction?
Holly Golightly. Because God, I feel like Holly Golightly. Oh my God, this is the gayest list ever. Holly Golightly, Lorelei Lee, who is Marilyn Monroe's character in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Brilliant.
The Little Prince.
Oh, yeah.
Because I love that book. Still to this day, it's by my bed and I read it every now and then. I really feel this kindred thing for The Little Prince and how the flower teaches him this lesson about what's important and what's not important. And can I say somebody that actually really existed?
Yeah, sure. Why not? There's no rules.
Gordon Parks. He was this legendary Black photographer from the 40s and 50s into the 60s and 70s, and he was a director, and he was an activist and highly influential in the civil rights movement. And Gordon Parks, and he looked so good doing it. Mm-hmm. Like there's these pictures of him, like, you know, for Life magazine, and he's like in a trench coat carrying like a great leather bag with that giant camera from, you know, with the big flash as he headed to the war front. And seeing images of him as a kid and even as I was growing up as he was doing his thing. And he directed, or did he direct or write Shaft? Oh, like, wow. He was this like he was just this icon. There were no limits for him. And he's one of those people that I look at and I'm like, you can do whatever the fuck you want. Gordon Parks was like, I'm gonna pick up a camera and I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna pick up a pen and I'm gonna write this. You can do whatever you want if you want it bad enough.
And lastly, what's your greatest fear?
That I will die, and my epithet is Marcellus Reynolds from Big Brother.
I think that's a good place to end. Marcellus Reynolds, oh my God, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I'm looking forward to the line of bathrobes. I will invest in that company. It's good to see you out of a bathrobe in some normal clothes. And you're
only for you, sir. I ran around this apartment. I was like, do I put on a blazer? Wait, it's sweater weather. No. Sweater weather.
I love it. I love it, sir. Thank you so much. And I look forward. This is not going to be the last time you're on here because it's just way too much fun. So have a wonderful day, and I'll chat with you soon.
Thank you, sir.
All right, bye.